Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the What Kind of Man at YouTube with another model video. Today we will be reviewing the GodHand's 3mm and 10mm sanding sponges. The one on the left is 400 grit sanding and the one on the right is a variety of grits for polishing, which I enjoy doing. 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10,000 grit. It's quite appealing packaging and normally fairly pricey. Decided to pick them up from Japan as it is far more affordable. And looking at the demonstrations on the back, you can use the existing strips and how thin and flexible they are. They can contour to any shape or can be cut, pressed into all sorts of weird shapes and contours, and sand or surface whatever that's required to be done. The 400 grit 3mm comes in 5 pieces. It's quite smooth on the back, being quite rough, not easily tearing the paper off. The glue is quite good and it bends and contours, but it can become fairly straight again, so if the quality is good enough, this should last many sessions. I'm going to soak this strip for a few hours in water and see if any significant damage occurs for long-term submersion. Here is the selection of the finer grit sandpaper back to front. Here's some various parts we can experiment with, including removing nubs, treating a surface and removing a seam line. So we're going to sand around this piece and it contours fairly well. However, it does leave a bit of debris in there, which is expected. And going around smooth surfaces and whatnot, it's fairly consistent and we're not left with any pearlescent finish. This is a pearlescent coated kit, which I want to get rid of all that coating for hand painting and to make sure it etches quite well, and it's working alright dry, but now we've got this build up. Ideally, and what I always like to do is wet sanding, wiping this into water. We're actually cleaning off the dust and you get a little bit of less effectiveness in the grit, but then it starts to polish up quite nicely. I've noticed that the glue is not separating from the sponge. It's pretty much doing what I would expect of it. Now, with the polishing sponges, what we're going to do is we're going to see if we can actually make this shine. The polishing sponges are far more dense and they're harder, but they are really contouring nicely and not causing any damage. This process of polishing, I would definitely highly recommend using it wet. And we're going to build up to 4,000 and see if we can make this thing shine. If this was to have paint on it, I would be very careful and apply very lightly, as due to how dense the sponge is, if you're to focus too much sanding on an edge and not actually on the surface, you will wear the paint and the primer off down to bare plastic, especially if the colouring underneath is different to what you're painting it. Moving on to the next grit, 6,000, and we're just wiping around the foot of this mech, and it's doing a good job. This is very easy and quick to use, as I can tell what grits are on the back. I can just put it down, grab the next one and go back to sanding. If you do wish to learn how to get imperfections out of clear coats, paints, finishes, I have done a video on low grit and high grit sanding of paintwork and cleanup. So that's worked quite nicely. You can tell on this side we definitely have not done any sanding. Dip a little bit in the water, and this feels like it's just polishing. This is the 10,000 grit, and it just feels absolutely amazing. It's grinding and buffing everything up to a beautiful shine. Funnily enough, that plastic has a beautiful shine to it. If I really wanted to do a high metallic or a clear gloss coat after the primer and the paint, I would hit these sanding sponges onto the surface, do a clear, and do it again. This sheen naturally reflecting off the light in this room is pretty good. I am reasonably impressed. For 6,600 yen, we've got all the grits in one go onto a sponge and 2 pieces. So far for polishing, definitely recommended. Testing it on paint would be ideal, but from my experience of using this sort of stuff, it's all about how much pressure you apply. Next we are dealing with a nub. So the correct etiquette is to leave about 1 mil or so from the part, not to cause any damage. To cut it off as close as you humanly can and scrape the last of it very delicately with a super sharp knife, but not deep enough that you're actually going to gouge a hole out of the plastic. If it's still rough on the surface, that's okay, because the next step is to sand it. And we're going to try it dry first, and it feels pretty good. Dip a little bit in the water, and we sand it all up. Now if we were to actually wanting to remove it and not leave any mark behind, we can actually polish it up with the other ones. So there is a slight actual bit of evidence that is behind discoloration from the stressing of the plastic, and by continuing to polish it among all the grits, this mark in theory should disappear and become one with the plastic. And running through all the sandpapers really quickly, there's not much mucking around. 10,000, and there you go. That's almost not even noticeable. It's practically gone. The final test involves the removal of putty from a seam line, imperfections and scratch building. Normally you would want to have something of a higher grit, and you can get higher grit GodHand Sandpaper at 120. There is a lot of excess putty, so I'm going to remove a lot of that off camera with traditional sandpaper. We didn't ground it too much where we're re-exposing the seam. It's just most of the build-up is removed. In theory, if you were removing a seam and you wanted to keep the plastic colour, you were having no intention of actually painting, you could just use an excess amount of glue, let it ooze out a bit, and keep sanding it with the GodHand sponge and the polishing set until it disappears. And if it still sinks a bit, you can mix a tiny bit of ground runner of that colour and cement, reapply it and re-sand it. It will be absolutely perfect. This project is going to be painted, so I'm not worried. It is a circular piece, so using a flat bit of sandpaper or a file, sanding it on the cylinder, you're going to flatten the area there, and it's not going to be a perfect sphere anymore. The sponges, the bows and other techniques out there ideally is out there so you can keep the shape and remove the putty. This is also a good test, as we're going to leave a foreign substance in the actual sanding material, and we'll see if we can actually rub that out. But surprisingly, it's moving a sufficient amount of material and not actually changing the shape of the plastic, mostly because the putty, Tamiya type, is softer than the plastic itself. However, the problem with having something too soft is once we ground it too much, it starts to pick out and pull material out of the seam and leaving the edges of the plastic exposed. So we're looking for that happy medium. And generally, it's looking pretty good. I'm going to move down to 2000 grit, but I'm not going to go too hard polishing, just to neaten her up a bit. There you go, that is an ideal seam, and I'm not catching anything with my nail. So that is an ideal removed seam line. To clean, we're just going to rub it in there. Wipe it on a clean surface like a rag, a tissue on your arm or something, and everything comes out quite nicely. That was surprisingly very quick to actually clean, and with a bit of sanding it doesn't feel like it's lost anything. It is a bit softer. The other bit is far more firmer. I'm going to let that dry and see if it returns back to its original strength after a little wait. We've been at it for a couple of hours, resanded all the torso pieces, as well as cleaned up and assembled the feet units, utilizing mostly this piece, and it is still in very good shape. The original piece that I've used as dried, and it's got the same firm feel on either side, so initially adding it in water does not separate the glue, wear it out or dissolve the sandpaper. Sometimes sandpaper does dissolve and the texture comes off, and sometimes you can use it for many months, even to years. And we've soaked this one for a few hours, and we can tell that it's not wearing off, it's not causing any problems. It's a fairly quality sandpaper. I used the sets imported from Germany for polishing up to 8000 grit, cut out 8 by 2 centimeters, and used the same piece for about 2 years straight, mostly polishing the Q-Ballet project. Though in the way of sanding the entirety of a piece, removing seam line putty or removing nubs, I'm fairly happy with this product. Again, outside of Japan it can be very expensive. It is widely available in Australia through all hobby shops supplied by Hobbyco and Hobbyco directly. However, buying one packet of this with 18 of the same strips, or multiple strips with the fine grit sanding larger sponges, you're going to get your value for money, and they're going to last you for a lot longer throughout the hobby, opposed to buying a paper-backed form of sandpaper from an automotive or hardware store and utilizing it until the paper starts to break down, dissolve and lose its texture. All in all, it's safe to confirm that this is okay to get and utilize. I'm going to enjoy using this for quite a while, especially on the paint buffing and polishing front. Just want to touch on the finer grit GodHand sanding sponges utilized on top of dried acrylic and lacquer paint. I've hand painted all of these components in grey lacquer and then overlaid them with lacquer pink. They eventually started to form up little lumps, bubbles, paint streaks that was very noticeable, and sanded down. There's only 1 or 2 points that I went down to primer or plastic to get rid of something quite annoying. That was very gentle and easy to work around all sorts of contours and whatnot. With this piece, the little areas here and here were impossible to get to, but standard sanding paper will fix that opposed to a sponge. Regarding all the other finer detail and curves, not a problem with detail like this. And as you can see, these parts are very, very smooth. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. Check out the description section down below for all the usual social media links. leave a comment. I do like to interact and answer any sort of questions. This is all filmed from Osaka, Japan, and catch you guys next time. Stay tuned for more.